Hello, this is a quiz review video for the portions exchange that we have on January 23rd, which is a Thursday. I'm going to try and go through this as efficiently as possible to make the video not be as long. Again, just like always, take notes in your journals on the work that we're doing on this quiz review video and take a photo of it and put it in Google Classroom so I can see that you practiced. Please remember, this is coming out, I'll probably publish this this weekend, but it'll probably be seen by you officially on Tuesday. But remember, Tuesday is lunchtime, one of the fewer times that we'll have before the quiz to get some additional practice at lunch. Also office hours. Please feel free to pop in and check in with me at office hours so we can get any last support you might need before this quiz. All right, so we're talking about decimals, percents, fractions exchange that's happening there. And I want to start by just reminding you that I think the friendliest of our portion exchanges, I'm going to move the camera just a little bit. The one that I think that everyone really feels pretty comfortable with is the idea of going from a decimal to a percent or a percent back to a decimal, like that. Either way, I think we're pretty comfortable about a decimal move. If you're ever stuck, if you're not quite sure what to do, then go to an anchor point, something that you know is true. You all know that 0.5, which is the decimal, is equal to 50%. So if you're ever not sure, it's unlikely, I'm going to make this 5 look a little better. It is unlikely that this exchange is going to appear on the quiz. However, you can always write this on the page if that is going to help you remember which direction your decimal point is moving. So you are welcome to write anything on your quiz that will be helpful for triggering a memory for you about how something works. So you know that if we have 0.5 and 50% are equal, we know that this is 1/2 and this is 1/2, that you're going to be moving your decimal point 2 spaces to the right to get to the 50%, right? 0.5, 1, 2 spots over, now it's a percent if it moves that direction, right? And so decimals point moving to the right makes it a percent. If your decimal point moves to the left 2 spaces, it is becoming a decimal point, losing the percent, right? So if I have 50% and my decimal point sits right here, 1, 2 spots going that direction makes it 0.5, and we lose the percent symbol, right? So just remember that piece of it, if that is helpful, to go ahead and write it down. So the anchor point of 0.5 equaling 50% is a really good trigger for your memory, all right? So if a decimal is going to a percent, it moves to the right. If it's going from a percent to a decimal, it moves to the left. I think we know that it being the decimal point moves 2 spaces to the right if it's going from a decimal to a percent, and it moves 2 spaces to the left if it's going from a percent to a decimal. All right, so decimal to percent, 2 to the right, percent to decimal, 2 to the left. Clear, right? So this anchor is going to be really helpful for you if you need that memory. All right, now, if we are going from a decimal to a fraction or from a fraction to a decimal, that's a whole different little process here, all right? Going from a decimal to a fraction, again, thinking about our benchmarks, those are really helpful anchors for yourself if you're wanting a reminder about what is what, right? So let's go with 0.75, which is our benchmark. We already know that that's 3/4. right? We already know that 75 hundredths and 3/4 are equivalent, right? So if you wanted evidence of that on a quiz, for example, then you would have the one way of doing it is to say, read the name of that decimal, 75 hundredths. 75 hundredths. That's how it's read as a decimal. You read the number, name the place value of the last digit, 75 hundredths, but then you write that as a fraction, 75 hundredths. We know what that looks like. It's 75 with a 100 in the denominator, and then that can simplify if possible. Right? Sometimes these fractions can simplify, sometimes they cannot. If you had 19 hundredths, that would be a fraction that could not simplify. It would stay 19 hundredths because 19 is prime. No common factors, right? Other than 1. Okay, for a fraction going to a decimal, that involves a division problem. And please remember that we said that 3/4, this is our model. We already know what the answer is going to be. Please remember that that fraction bar means divided by. So it's going to be 3 divided by 4, right? 4 does not go into 3. So we have our 0 here, add our decimal point. Now we can have a 0 here. 4 goes into 37 times. 7 times 4 is 28. I subtract, I get 2. I can add another 0, bring it down. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20, and we're done. All right, so here we got our 75 hundredths out of this division problem that we just did. All right, so that's the quick about it. Now we'll do an example in just a minute where we have a fraction that is a mixed number that we're trying to turn into a decimal and into a percent. And there's a little bit more to it than that exactly, but basically here's your division problem. All right. All right, and the last little pair of exchanges that we might have, a situation might be where we're turning a percent into a fraction or a fraction into a percent. All right, so to turn a percent into a fraction, let's start with a friendly percent like 60%. All right, please remember that this percent, my pen needs to work. There we go. Percent means out of 100 for our purposes. No, how about there? I'll put the quotes there. Out of 100 for these purposes, right? Percent always doesn't mean out of 100, but for our cases where we're turning a percent into a fraction, it does, which means that 60% equals 60 out of 100. All right. Now, if that fraction can simplify, which it does, then please do so. All right. So right now I know that 20 will divide into both. You might have simplified it by 10 and then realized, oh, I could divide that by 2 again, but 60 is our greatest common factor for 60. 20 is the greatest common factor for 60 and 100, so it simplifies it in one single step, which gives us 3/5. All right, so if I wanted to go from percent to a fraction, put whatever the number here is over 100, simplify if possible. All right, going from a fraction to a percent is a little more involved. So that fraction to a percent might be something as simple as finding a benchmark or converting into a fraction that has 100 in the denominator or a 10 in the denominator. It would be really, really helpful. If you can't do that, then it's going to require you to go to a division problem and then move your decimal. All right. So if we had 3/5, for example, hey, that's that example. I know I could multiply the bottom by 20, I could multiply the top by 20, and I would end up with 60 over 100, which we know means 60%. But let's say we didn't have 3/5. Let's say we had 2/5. Okay, I could still, that's a bad example because I could still multiply the top and the bottom by 20 and I would end up with that 100 that I wanted. Let's say if it was 1/3. Well, we all know that 1/3 is 33% because that's a benchmark that we practiced earlier in the quiz that we just had, right? But if we were to try and turn it from a fraction into a percent, it means we have to go by way of decimal, right? Which is going to be that 1 divided by 3. 3 doesn't go in there. Add your 0, add your decimal points. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract, I have 1. Oh no, it's a repeating decimal. 3 goes into 10 3 times. So it's 0.33, right? Then you move your decimal point over to get your 33%, right? So percents to fractions, easy peasy. Fractions to percents requires either an equivalent fraction that we know that's going to be helpful or a division problem. All right. That covers all of our exchanges. We did fractions to decimals. We did decimals to fractions. We did percents to decimals. We did decimals to percents. We did percents to fractions, fractions to percents. Okay, I think we're ready to go. We have 3 sample problems, all of which 4 sample problems, all of which involve a mixed number. All right, so you can practice that because there will be mixed numbers on the quiz. All right, so meet me back here while I write the problems down. All right, I have 1 3/8, and I want to know what that is as a decimal, and I want to know what that is as a percent. All right, that's part of our portions exchange. You have a couple of strategies that you can use for this. One strategy is to not even worry about that one whole yet and just deal with the 3/8. Because the nice thing about a mixed number, whether it's a decimal or a fraction or a percent that's in above 100%, is that we can kind of ignore that at first. We could just do 3/8 and convert 3/8 into a decimal and then throw the 1 back on. Just don't forget that you're removing the 1 and dealing just with the 3/8. Don't leave the 1 off. You got to put it back on at the end. I'll show you what I mean. So let's pretend for a second that we're just dealing with 3/8 rather than 1 3/8. All right. There's no conversion that I can do that's going to get me 100 or a 10 in the denominator here. So we have to go with division. Okay. For this purpose, since a couple of the other problems we're going to do have an 8 in the denominator, I think it's helpful first to remember our multiples of 8, right? So that we can have that on hand. Okay. Those are all of our multiples of 8 that we need. Just because we're going to be dividing and getting into the decimals, right? And so that's a strategy of having your list of multiples here is going to be really helpful to avoid errors when we're doing it, and it's going to help speed you up a little bit. Unless you have your multiplication facts all memorized, which I know some of us don't. All right, so 8 does not go into 3. Add my decimal point, add my 0, extend my line a little bit. 8 goes into 30 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract, and I have 6. Add a 0, bring it down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. It's Friday. It's a long day when I'm recording this. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract, I have my 4. Add one more 0. And you might be saying, Mr. Dell, what? We go to thousandths. 8 goes into 40, 4 times. No, 5 times, because it goes in there evenly. There we go. 375 thousandths. All right, so there's our decimal equivalent of 3/8. But this is 1 3/8, right? So 1 3/8 equals 1 375 thousandths. All right. So now I have our fraction portion, I have our decimal portion, and then I have my percent portion is going to require me to move my decimal point over 2 spots, right? So 137.5%. Remember, you can have decimals in a percent, all right? It's a portion of a portion, which is fine, right? It's a 0.5% more than 137%. So here I have my division, here I have my decimal, here I show my percent, all right? So I hear things crawling into the floor. Okay. All right, let's say that we had 245% on the quiz, and I'm asking you to show me that as a decimal and as a fraction. Well, that's really friendly about turning our percent into a decimal. We know that that equals, here's where our decimal point lives when it's not showing, because this is a whole number, so we typically don't show that decimal point, but that's where it will be found. 2 decimal points over to where it will live, and then we lose our percent symbol. So it's 2 45 hundredths. All right, that's a pretty quick move. Doesn't need to have a lot of work showing, just on the quiz, showing me that you're using your arrow to move those spaces over twice. And now we have 2 45 hundredths. How do we say 2 45 hundredths? How do you read it? 2 45 hundredths? 2 45 hundredths is how we would read that as a fraction. All right, which would then be a fraction that can simplify. All right, we're going to divide the top and the bottom by the same number. All right, I know that 45 divided by 5 is 9. I know 100 divided by 5 is 20. Don't forget our whole number. 2 9/20 is the fraction simplified version of 2 45 hundredths and 245%. So on the quiz, when I start off with, hello.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't pass by your room once more without showing you how much my dog looks like your Yoda.
Oh. Okay. All right, we got 2 more. 1 36 hundredths as a decimal. Again, pretty easy conversion to a percent. We're going to move our decimal point over 2 spots. That makes it 136%. All right. Turning 1 36 hundredths into a fraction. We're going to read, just like we had said in the directions, read that number out loud. 1 36 hundredths. All right, 36 hundredths, 36 hundredths. That is a fraction that can simplify. I'm looking to see what goes into both. I know 4 goes into both. Equals 1, and don't forget that whole number answer, and 9/20. 25ths. Oh, almost caught me in another mistake. 1 9/25. 9/25 does not simplify anymore because they do not share any other factors. All right, so 1 9/25 136%, 1 36/100 are all equivalent portions. One more. Let's see it. Back to fractions, back to a mixed number here, turning it into decimals and percents. All right. Here's an example of one. Remember when I said that you might want to look for a friendly portion? Is there a way that I can turn this into something that allows me to have a 10 or a 100 in the denominator? That's a pretty easy conversion. This is one of those ones where I would kind of pretend that it's not 2 3/5, but it's just 3/5 for a minute. Don't forget about the 2, put it back on in your answer, but 3/5, I can multiply the top and the bottom by something that will get me the answer that I want, right? So here I could go times 2 times 2 and end up with 6/10, all right? But then remember that it's 2 3/5, which is gonna make it 2 6/10. All right, that 6/10 is gonna be really, really helpful to us when we're trying to do a decimal or a percent. We know that 2 6/10 looks like 2 6/10. So this 2 3/5 can turn into 2 6/10, which is this as a decimal. Going from a decimal to a percent means we're just going to move our decimal point over 1, 2 spots. Now you might notice there's nothing here, so you're gonna have to add a 0 in that spot, which would make it 260%. All right, so 2 6/10 and 260% are equivalent portions. And so is 2 3/5. All right, so we have several different math problems that we have tried, converting from decimals to fractions and percents, going from fractions to decimals to percents, going from percents to decimals and fractions. All right. Those same rules can be used for whatever problem I give you on the quiz. No matter what, if you're having a hard time remembering about getting it to an equivalent fraction here, division will always work. So let me do one more example of what that would look like. You can take 2 3/5, turn it into an improper fraction. And if you remember how we do that, that's the one where we take our denominator, multiply times the whole number, which is 5 times 2 is 10, plus the numerator gives me 13. 2 3/5 is the same thing as 13/5. You can turn this into a division problem then. Now here's a situation where 5 does go into 13. It goes in there twice. 2 times 5 is 10. I subtract and I have 3. Now I add my decimal point and my 0. 5 goes into 30 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. Right? So we still end up with our 2 6/10 when we turn it into a division problem. All right? So there's a few different avenues that you can take that will get you to the same end point. All right? So we probably won't have questions any more challenging than the ones that we just did. Probably going to have mixed numbers on them. So if you have any questions about any of this, by all means, please ask. I would love to help you out on Tuesday during lunch. I'd love to help you out on Wednesday during office hours. But I'm also going to remind you, none of this is new. These quiz review videos are just covering things that we've covered quite a bit in class already. Weeks of practice on this. But if you're still not sure, Tuesday is going to be your second to last, and Wednesday is going to be your last chance to ask for support before the quiz on Thursday. All right. Get those photos taken of the work we just did. That's a lot. Sorry, it's a longer video, but last week's video was like 7 minutes long. It was very short, so I kind of made up for it today. All right. Thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow.